The Knife Edge Pass. In this video, we'll be covering the opposing knife edge pass from the number 5 lead solo perspective. This maneuver is fairly straightforward and will be relatively easy to learn even for an inexperienced pilot. It is also the foundation for the entire solo sequence, and you will notice that the solo maneuvers build in complexity from this basic starting point. Because of this, we'll spend a little extra time in this video explaining the setup for this maneuver. For every opposed maneuver, number 5's responsibility as the lead solo is to make a radio call indicating the upcoming maneuver, establishing both pilots' orientation to the showline, altitude, and the specifics of the clear after the maneuver as necessary, and to respond to number 6's inbound speed and distance from center point calls in order to set up the best hit. Once within the showbox, you are responsible to hit a consistent speed and altitude, thus allowing number 6 to establish an ideal vertical offset during the hit so it creates the correct overlapping picture from the ground. So 5 is responsible for timing and 6 is responsible for spacing, but each pilot must fly a consistent and correct profile in order to help the other pilot do their job and make the maneuver look perfect. Briefing. The knife edge pass maneuver starts with what is called an abeam setup. After clearing from the section takeoff maneuver, number 5 will be turning parallel to center line on the crowd left heading, meaning away from center point, behind the crowd at anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 feet AGL, and they will be accelerating up to 400 knots indicated airspeed. At 4 nautical miles, number 5 will turn 90 degrees to the front of crowd heading. This is the start of the abeam setup because we are now flying abeam the showbox and perpendicular to the show line. This starting point and the following ingress to the showbox will be the same for every maneuver that starts with this setup. We'll pause and watch the turn abeam. Once 5 turns abeam, there are a series of radio calls between the two solo pilots to establish relative position and timing, which I'll go over in detail in the walkthrough portion of the video. After 5 makes the final radio call, stand by market, both pilots turn in for center point. The objective from here on in is for both pilots to fly 400 knots all the way in from the 4 nautical mile mark to center point. This equates to roughly 10 seconds for every mile, with the entire maneuver from the turn-in to the clearing of the showbox lasting approximately 1 minute. This is important for timing with the diamond, and even though we don't fly with one, it's important to learn. As you ingress, 6 will be calling their speeds and distances with each mile, and your job is to match 6's distance calls as best as possible, adjusting your speed as needed to make the timing work for the perfect hit right at center point. Let's pause. The actual maneuver consists of the 2 jets passing center point on the knife edge, which means rolled 90 degrees onto their left wing. The maneuver is then completed with a standard solo clear, front of crowd to the right, which we will cover in detail during the walkthrough next. When performed correctly, both aircraft will appear to pass through one another nose to nose right on center point, with the full planform of the jet in view. This always produces a gasp from the crowd, and it's a great way to warm up the body to the G-forces and give the crowd a taste of what to expect for the next 40 minutes. Before getting into the knife edge pass maneuver, let's talk a little bit about the airspace you're going to be flying in during the airshow. This is a page from the 2023 Blue Angels FAA-approved Maneuvers Manual. and it defines exactly the airspace that a Blue Angels Airshow will occupy. In the middle of the diagram is a center point, a spot on the ground where all other distances are measured and where all other maneuvers will use as reference. Running through the center point, perpendicular to the crowd's viewpoint, is the center line. Along the center line are the markers at 1, 2, and 3 nautical mile distances, respectively. Towards the crowd from center point is a line marked 1,200 feet, and behind it another line marked 1,500 feet. The 1,500-foot line is known as the crowd line. The crowd line marks the closest lateral point that the crowd may come to center point. The 1,200-foot line indicates the closest lateral point that the show crew members may come to center point. On the other side of center point is another 1,500-foot line, which indicates another no-go zone where no personnel or civilians may be located. These measurements combine with a 1 nautical mile left and right of center point no-go zone. So to the right and left of center point, 1 nautical mile, and 1,500 feet from center point laterally in both directions is the showbox as seen from the sky. But we're flying aircraft, and aircraft go up and down, so that means that there is an additional 10,000-foot z-axis that, combined with our other measurements, makes up what is called the showbox. So in summary, there's a piece of sky that is 2 miles wide, 3,000 feet long, and from the surface to 2 miles tall, that is the showbox. Here's another page from the Maneuvers Manual defining all the different magnetic headings that are important during the airshow. These also count as ingress and egress routes for different maneuvers. Most of the solo sequence maneuvers happen along the show line, but some of them come in from different angles, and our clears are typically along the 30-degree radials. For the knife edge pass, we will perform a standard in front of crowd clear, and as number 5, we will be clearing crowd right. For these lessons, we are flying at the Kobuleti Airfield in the Caucasus Theater in Digital Combat Simulator. Here at Kobuleti, the crowd right heading is 244, with the 30-degree in front of crowd heading being 214. Let's get into it. Here we are sitting in the cockpit of the F-18C Hornet, and I'll be walking through all the details to perform the opposing knife edge pass. Now, before we get started, I want to just explain the cockpit a little bit to you. Just above our knees is our 2 MFDs, which are our multi-function displays. On the left MFD, I have the HSI screen. This is going to be giving me a little bit of situational awareness. Also, this little diamond points to where center point is, so this helps me understand when we hit center point for some of the maneuvers, especially later on during the Fortis and the high alpha maneuvers. On the right MFE, at the moment, I have the radar screen open, but generally I will have the FCS page open, so I have an understanding of how all of my flight surfaces are operating and whether they're operating to spec. Now, another important thing to note here is down here, at the bottom left just above the knee, this little screen right here is our fuel state. This is something that we'll be using communicating with 6 to understand whether or not we're burning too much fuel or if we have to be concerned about it at all. And over here, as we've already talked about, is our RPMs for our engine. Alright, let's get ourselves back up forward and looking at the HUD, because the HUD is something that's important and we need to talk about. So, how are we reading the HUD? Let's start from top to bottom. Up here, we have our magnetic heading. So this is the direction that the plane is heading according to the magnetic compass and our INS system on our aircraft. Moving to the left here, we have our indicated airspeed. Below that is our angle of attack. Our angle of attack is not something we're going to be paying a lot of attention to in this particular maneuver, but it's extremely valuable when it comes to doing some of the loops that we do during the show, or during the high alpha maneuver. Below that is our Mach number. This is extremely useful during the sneak to vertical rolls especially. And below that is our G number, and this is the current G and the maximum G that we have pulled. Now, moving over to the right, we have our altitude indicator, as well as our vertical speed indicator, with positive numbers being climb and negative numbers being descent. Down here is our waypoint indicator, and you can see it's designated as a target. Now, we don't have the benefit of having a comm cart or signal officers at our center point that help guide us in to center point, so we actually use our HMD, which is our helmet-mounted display, as well as a target diamond to guide us in to center point. So let's back out of the HUD here, and we'll get our view a little bit reset. And let's start talking about what we're going to be doing here. So, first things first. Where are we in the sky? So currently, we are 3.6 nautical miles away from center point. We're at 400 knots at 1,300 feet, and we are currently behind crowd left, flying away from the crowd. Now, all of our ingresses, when it comes to a beam setup, are going to be turned in at 4 nautical miles, and we will want to be trying to sync this up with number 6 when he calls 4 miles mark. Now, in this particular maneuver, because of the fact that we have just done our dirty roll-on takeoff and rolled out behind the crowd, we are positioned a little further behind crowd and a little further left of crowd than 6. So we're going to have to make up for that time by making our turn a little bit wider and then coming in a little bit slower to the maneuver than we normally would for an abeam call. So we're flying straight and level, trying to hit 400 knots. We're going to unpause here, and at 4 miles, we're going to start our turn-in. And this is going to be a fairly lazy turn-in because we're waiting for 4 miles mark from 6. So he gives us that mark call, and we're at about 4.4 miles. Now, when he says 4 miles mark, we start our communication for how to get into this maneuver, our abeam call communication. So when he says 4 miles mark, I will then call, let me know when you're abeam. As soon as I say that, I'm looking outside the cockpit and looking for center point, which is actually going to be behind me back there. This is going to be a little complicated of a turn-in. So once I call, let me know when you're abeam, I am looking to be abeam myself. So we're going to unpause here, keep looking at center point, and he'll say abeam right about here. This means that he is abeam of the center point, and that we can begin to turn in for our maneuver. So I will say, let me know when you can take your mark. Our mark is a phrase that we use to indicate that we are turning in for the maneuver. So I'm asking him, are you ready to go, basically? So I say, let me know when you're ready to take your mark. And he will reply with, go ahead and take it, or take it, indicating to me that he is ready to turn in and start the maneuver. At which point I will say, stand by, mark it. And then we'll turn in. So, let me know when you're abeam. Abeam. Let me know when you're ready to take your mark. Go ahead and take it. Stand by, mark it. And now we're turning in. We're rolling in for center point. We're trying to bring the center point into our HUD. And now we're rolling out. And 4 miles mark comes the call from number 6, who you can just see out the canopy over there. Little tiny speck in the distance. So at this stage, he's called 4 miles mark. That means he is at 4 nautical miles from center point, ideally on center line. Now note that we are 3.8 miles from center point and a little bit inboard of center line. The inboard will be able to correct as we come into the maneuver, but that little 0.2 miles that we are ahead, that's going to be a problem. 0.2 miles might not seem like a lot, but you have to back off the speed a significant amount to ensure that you match up with 6's inbound calls, because we're supposed to be right on time with 6, and it's our job to adjust to make that happen. Note that we're also at 700 feet, and by the time we hit the showbox, we're supposed to be down to 200 feet. So we've turned in. We're at 3.8 miles when he calls for, so we're a little ahead of him, so that means our speed needs to decrease. So he's looking for 400 knots, and we're right now at 341, so we're at a pretty good speed to try and ease off and back ourselves into alignment with 6. And we're a little high, and we're a little inboard of the show line, so we're going to have to work our way out, work our way down, increase our speed, and try and match the next call for 6, which is going to be 3 miles. Now, after he calls 4 miles mark and gives me his speed, then it's our turn to make our radio call. It's our responsibility, as I stated in the overview at this point, to call out what the maneuver is that we're doing, on what side of the center line, and then, if needed, what kind of clears we're doing and what kind of altitude we're doing. So for this particular maneuver, the knife edge, I would say, chariots in for the right knife edge. The response that 6 would give is call sign is in for the right knife edge. So he repeats what I said with his call sign, which tells me I know what maneuver we're doing, we can proceed. So the call in our case with chariot and leb would be chariots in for the right knife edge. Leb's in right knife edge. That needs to happen between 4 miles and 3 miles because I need to give him time to give me the 3 mile call and to be able to think about that 3 mile call and think about that speed. So, let's see whether or not we can get on. Let's unpause it here. Chariots in right knife edge. Leb's in right knife edge. 3 miles mark. 4:03. And so now you can see when he gives that call, we were a little bit ahead still. We were at 2.9, but that's fine because we're still a little slow. So 394 is a decent speed. We're down to 320 knots, and we're starting to roll out just a little right of centerline because we want to give 6 enough space that we don't conflict when we do the knife edge maneuver. At this point, it's all focused on trying to match 6's calls and get down to that 200 feet. So let's see how we do. Oversped a little bit here. 2 miles mark. 4010 or 410. So as you can hear, I gave the simulated call from 6 and it was a little early. So he was at 2 miles and we were at 2.1, and that means we had to speed up a little bit. So as we're speeding up, we're clearing a building here, which is why we're getting the altitude warning, and we're down to 210 knots, still descending, so it looks like we're going to be on profile. And as you can see, center point right down here. Let's see if we can zoom in on that. Center point is right there. We created a little cross for these tutorials so you can understand what the center point looks like, but our philosophy being flying in multiplayer servers, we're not often going to have a center point indication. So there you can see 6 just a little bit in the diamond there, right there. Looks like he's on profile online and everything, so he's got set up earlier than us. We're still working it in, and we got time to do so. So the next call is going to be us. He's giving us the final speed and distance call. That's 2 miles. Our next call is going to be smoke on, and smoke on's going to happen at 1 mile, and that's our responsibility. So now we have to get online, predicting that he's going to get to 1 mile a little before us, and then we have to call smoke on. So let's see how we do it here. Rolling in, we're a little fast. Bring the power back. Smoke on. So I called smoke on at about 1.2, 1.1, and that's because I want both of our smokes to turn on at 1 mile. So let's see how we did here. Let's take a look over there. I could just see a little bit of white plume showing up behind his jets. That's perfect. Our smokes are on at 1 mile, and we're coming in for the maneuver. Now at this point, we're trying to peg 400 knots. We're trying to get ourselves right about at 200. We're a little low, but Leb knows that I tend to fly low. So at this point, we're rolling straight towards the center point, and our objective at this point is to execute the proper maneuver. Now, coming in, it's our responsibility to give the ready hit it call. And the ready hit it call is going to need to be kind of a gut feeling. A general rule is it's about 0.2 miles, but if you're looking at your mile marker down here, and you're not looking at 6, you're definitely going to miss center point. So it's something that you have to just learn the closing distances and what that looks like in order to make the hit work best. But remember that there's going to be a little bit of delay between when you call ready hit it and when you both roll to the knife edge, because you both still have to yug and roll to the knife edge, and we'll talk about the yug in a second. So we're going to unpause this and take it a little slower here because things start to happen really fast once we hit the showbox, which is this 1 mile mark. Alright, so we're coming in, smoke's on, I can see him. And at this point, I'm going to call contact, and he's going to call contact. What that means is, I see you. And the smoke is not just for dramatic effect, it's so that we can actually see each other across the showbox. So I see him, he sees me, he says contact. I say contact. I say, as a courtesy call, smoke off. But on the other person's contact, we're supposed to turn our smoke off. So I'll call smoke off so that our smoke offs are synced, and then at that point, it's time to roll in for the rest of the maneuver. So we're both contact. I call smoke off. Smoke's off now. And now I'm looking at his jet. I'm waiting until the right moment to say ready, hit it, and that's going to be right about here. That's what feels right to me. And ready, hit it means execute the maneuver. So as soon as he hears ready, hit it, beat, on that next beat is when he will execute the maneuver. Now, if you watch any of our streams, you will see that my timing is a little bit later than Leb's timing, and that's because there's lag across Discord and across the internet, and I've learned the timing differences between that lag when it comes to performing the show. So we've called ready, hit it, and now we're going to yug. And what a yug is it's a small deflection of the stick aft, so backwards, and that pitches the nose up to about 1.5 2 degrees nose high, at which point we're going to put a little bit of forward stick into it, which lightens the aircraft, gets us to around 0 Gs, and that's where the aircraft likes to maneuver, especially when it comes to rolls. And so once we push that stick forward and get to 0 Gs, that's when we're going to roll to the knife edge, and that's a 90-degree roll to the left. So let's see how that works. Ready, hit it. Zoom out, there's the yug, and the roll. And right about here, note that we are in a pretty good position. And right now, we are more or less on the knife edge. Still got a couple of degrees to go, but right at this point, we're going to be kicking in the right rudder because the plane's going to want to drop the nose down towards the horizon and bury us in the ground. Because at this point, all of our flight surfaces that produce lift are now basically up on the side, and so that lift is pulling us towards those trees over here and not up towards the sky. So in order to compensate for that, we're going to kick the rudder to the right, which is going to keep the nose more up than it would if we didn't kick the rudder, and allow us to complete this maneuver. So Leb's up there. I'm not looking at him anymore. I know that we've deconflicted, so I'm looking forward and trying to fly the best profile that I possibly can. So looking forward, let's unpause. We've kicked the right rudder in, and now that we have about to cross, we're going to start rolling out again. 90 degrees, rolling out. At this point, I would call clear, and so would Brother Leb. He would call clear. So we get 2 clear calls. The Blue Angels do 1. We have done 2 traditionally. We're working on backing it off to just 1. But he would call clear, at which point I would call roll and pull. And that means we're rolling left 45 degrees and pulling to 20 degrees nose high. And what that should accomplish if we do those 2 things is we should be pointed 30 degrees away from the crowd right, with a 20-degree climb, at which point we will release the pull and stay at that 45 degrees before we make our next call. Roll and the pull. I overrolled it. So I'm going to pull a little harder initially and then ease it off. And then we're over pulled a little bit, so a little bit of push. At this point, I will call stand by roll. And on that roll, we'll roll wings level. Then will come another stand by roll, which will roll us inverted. Then another stand by roll, which will be 270 degrees, continuing that roll to, once again, the knife edge. Brother Leb will then call clear, and I will call roll. That'll roll us wings level, at which point the maneuver is complete. So let's watch this in real time. Stand by roll, stand by roll, stand by roll. Berth left's clear. Roll! Chariot's clear, and clearing in front of the crowd for the opposing inverted to inverted rolls. 2 miles mark. Alright, so what happened there? After we cleared, I pushed the nose down level, and then immediately did a right-hand turn to face 244, which is the crowd right angle. At which point, I'm calling the next maneuver. I'm saying that we are both clear, and that we are clearing in front of the crowd for the opposing inverted to inverted rolls. So that's the next maneuver that we're going to do. And then I said 2 miles mark. That's telling Brother Lev where I am in the sky, because sometimes our speeds are a little different. In order to make sure that we're turning in at the same time for the next maneuver, we give each other a distance reference on this clear to make sure that we can adjust speeds as necessary to make sure we're both at 4 miles in order to turn in for the next maneuver. Here's the full knife edge maneuver from a show we did recently, with our full comms in as well. As you can see, not everything is perfect, but we still consider this a solid pass.
3 miles mark. Angels 3.5. 3.5. 4 miles mark.
Let me know when you're abeam.
Labs at beam.
Let me know when you're ready to take a mark.
Take it.
Stand by, mark it.
Four miles mark. 430.
Chariot's in for the right knife edge.
Labs in right knife edge. 3 miles mark. 400. Two miles mark. 400.
Smoke on. Contact.
Product.
Smoke off. Ready, hit it. Chariot's clear.
Clear.
Blow and pull. Stand by, roll. Stand by, roll. Stand by, roll.
Clear.
Roll. And Chariot's clear, and clearing in front of the crowd for the opposing inverted to inverted rolls. 2.2 mark.
And that's how the Legacy Blue Solos perform the Knife Edge Pass. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel, where you can find full side-by-side show sequences and debriefs. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the flight line.